Good afternoon, everyone. It is really brilliant to see you here. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Patrick Regan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kintsugi Hope, which is a charity that's wanting to bring safe and supportive spaces for those that are struggling with emotional and mental health. And we are absolutely thrilled to be hosting this lunchtime webinar looking at talking to young people about the cost of living. And I know for many of you that are working, whether you're youth workers, parents, people that are just passionate about young people, I know this has been a topic that so many people have been talking about over the last 6 months or so, and really trying to find a way through. And so we've got some amazing panelists, we've got some incredible input, but we would love to get your questions. So please start off straight away by putting your hardest question in the chat to our panelists, and we'll make sure that we'll get to as many of them as possible. I'm going to hand over to Ellie Gage, who is CAP's Chief Engagement Officer, and Ellie is passionate about equipping the church for helping people to tackle poverty, and I'm sure you're aware CAP have been doing an amazing job over many, many years. And we've just asked Ellie to give us a little bit of an overview, and then we're going to introduce the rest of the panelists to ask some questions and unpack it a little bit further. Ellie, thank you so much for being with us today, and just tell us what your thoughts are in terms of where we're at today.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first of all, just watching that report, I watched it a little while ago in preparation, and it's just heartbreaking, isn't it? I'm sure all of us on the call, hearing children and young people going without food, that can't pass you by without a reaction, and I'm reacting. As CAP, we recently did a YouGov poll to get some up-to-date numbers of how the cost of living, excuse me, was really affecting people. So I've got some numbers for you. 8.5 million people were missing meals because of the rising cost of food, their household food. 7.9 million people going without heating or electricity. And that means people sitting in the dark. It means people not having fridges and freezers. It means people turning down food at food banks because they have no means to cook it. They can only take food that can be eaten straight away. And 19.6 million people have cut out socializing and leisure altogether just to be able to cope with the rising cost of household bills. And, some of the things that I know we'll talk about today are in that socializing and leisure and not being alone. Isolation is one of the key symptoms of poverty that is crippling to people. 50% of the clients that we're now seeing at Christians Against Poverty, 50% of the budgets that are coming through are what we call broken budgets. That means that despite all our best efforts, all our expertise, 26 years experience of doing debt advice and creating household budgets for people, maximizing benefits, maximizing income, cutting costs and advice. Despite all of that, the budgets don't balance. And on average, that's to the tune of £200 a month that they're out. And so the reality is that even if we can help people in the short term, there is no long-term solution for them without income increasing by some means, or the cost of living reducing. And that's the sort of stage that we're at. 6.9 million people are falling behind on their household bills and using credit cards or loans or overdrafts to try and fill the gap. And as we know, that isn't sustainable, and it just can make matters way worse in the future. But if you are making a choice on, do I eat or not today? Do I feed the kids or not today? And if you know you've got a credit card in your purse or you've got an overdraft, I'll tell you what, you'd feed your kids, wouldn't you? Really, really impossible options that people are facing at the moment. And this is to the tune of millions of people. 40%, we have seen a 40% increase in the calls coming to CAP this year compared to last year, 40% increase. And we've seen 135% rise in our use of emergency fuel vouchers, where people aren't able to get the electricity on, they're not able to heat their homes or cook their food, as I've said. And so, you know, with the Fuel Bank Foundation, we're able to pass on those emergency fuel vouchers. But the need is huge, the need is massive. And so, unfortunately, the update is that it's a dark time financially, and all the dependencies that we will talk about now from that financial crisis, that household budget crisis that so many people are feeling, the knock-on effect to people's well-being in every way. So that's the update of what we're seeing and what some of the statistics are at the moment, Patrick.
Thanks, Ellie. That is really helpful. And I think the challenge with statistics, isn't it, is that every statistic is a life, is a
Yeah,
family. And I think so often what happens, particularly in the media, is like, I think sometimes the statistics are so overwhelming. You're like, oh my goodness, I don't even know how to process this. And I
yeah,
think that's a really important thing that we can think about. Like, what is our response as an individual? What is our response as a church? I was on the way to have a meeting in Parliament yesterday with a colleague of mine, and looking at the suicide rates. As we go into recession, suicide rates always go up. And so the relationship between poverty and mental health, they're just interlinked. And there was a lady who was 27 years old, and she had a 3-year-old child, and she had a big meeting with a landlord in so much debt, and obviously was in a really bad mental health space, and walked in front of a train and ended both of their lives. And as we say all these statistics, we must remember the human face of it all, and that's what I always try and remind politicians. Otherwise, we just see numbers everywhere, and so it's so important what you guys are doing in CAP, and we're really grateful for you and for your organisation and for what you stand for. I'm going to introduce some of our other guests as well. I'm going to invite Bejoy to join us. Bejoy is the CEO of Ascension Trust. And I'll let them explain what they do, because they probably do it better than I do, because hopefully they know it better than I do. But just to say that I've been friends with Ascension Trust like literally for about 25 years. I've known Les and Louise Isaac, and I've known Bejoy many times, and these guys are just brilliant. It's what street pastors and school pastors came out of. And I know they are doing lots around the UK to tackle huge issues that are facing. So Bejoy, just in a nutshell, I'm testing how good your elevated pitch is going to be now. Just tell us what Ascension Trust is all about.
Yeah, no, thank you, Patrick. Hi everyone, really great to be here. So the Ascension Trust is an organisation that's all about equipping and empowering the church and its congregations to be the visible presence of Jesus in its communities, reaching out to where people are, taking the time to listen to the different needs that people are facing in their community, and asking the simple question, how can we help? Working alongside the local police, local authorities, and other community organizations and stakeholders to provide that wraparound holistic care to say, we're here to help, but we can only help if we're working together with all of these different partners. And it's the heart of the gospel. Let's be relational in our approach, in listening to people, supporting people, and serving people.
Great, that's fantastic. Thanks, Bejoy. I'm going to introduce you now to Natalie Williams. Natalie Williams is the CEO of Jubilee Plus, and she's also written some really helpful books on this topic. The most recent being Invisible Divides, which I really recommend that you just Google it, find it, read it, and maybe tell some people in your church about it as well, because it'd probably be really helpful. So Natalie, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about Jubilee Plus and what you guys do.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. Thanks for the book plug. I appreciate that. Jubilee Plus, similar in some ways to Ascension Trust, basically looks to equip churches and Christians across the UK to help people in their communities out of poverty, and those who are facing injustice or who are vulnerable in any way. My own background is that I grew up in relative poverty in Hastings, where I now live again. I've moved back here. And so some of the things that we're talking about and how we have conversations with young people around this were conversations that I was having as a young person myself quite some time ago. But at Jubilee Plus, our focus has been historically on adults, but recently we've just launched a children's curriculum called Overflow, which is about helping 5 to 11s, so the younger age group, with how to essentially reach out to their friends and those around them who are in need at this time for various reasons. And we're looking to develop that into something for teenagers as well. So that's a little bit about us.
Oh, brilliant stuff, thank you. And now Joel Harris. Joel Harris is the leader of Kintsugi Youth, Kintsugi Students. And I know he's going to be talking a little bit later about what he does and stuff like that. But Joel, I wanted to come to you first because you're probably the youngest person on this panel, just having a look around. I hope that's okay. I hope I haven't done anything wrong there. But I know you're a young person yourself, and I know that you talk to lots of young people all the time. And one of the things that you've been helping us here at Kintsugi Help about is looking at the changes in youth culture. What are young people going through? We've had, you know, the pandemic, we've got war in Europe, and I guess just the uncertainty about everything at the moment, and uncertainty is always anxiety inducing, which is always really challenging, particularly for mental health. So just tell us a little bit around how you're seeing the land in terms of youth culture at the moment.
Of course, if you think back to your teenage years, they're formative years for you. You learn a lot, you become a lot. It's all about growing and seeing what's going on around the world. So for the past 2 years, our young people have been growing in a very confusing world. They saw a death count on their phones every day for 2 years. They saw people dying because of that. They've seen online on TikTok, they've seen a war in Europe. And the videos they're seeing about war in Europe isn't from newspaper articles, but actually videos of bombs landing on people. Videos of people their own age who look like them in bunkers, not sure where to go. Our young people have been faced with mortality more obviously than any other generation since World War II. That's what they've been growing up in. And then since then, we've been seeing the cost of living going up and young people are stressed about that. We're seeing young people missing eating and not telling their parents because they don't want their parents to stress about it. Recent survey by Young Minds revealed that the cost of living is the leading cause of anxiety in children and young people. Just over half of 11 to 25-year-olds say they felt angry, unhappy, stressed, or anxious over money in the last 3 months. We're also seeing uncertainty in government, uncertainty in police officers. We've seen all these stories, can't we? We saw the whole George Floyd thing. A 16-year-old was the person who created the petition or got 19 million signs to get those police officers arrested. Our young people are growing up in a culture right now where nothing is certain. And this cost of living, this is just another thing what's coming at them going, actually, nothing's certain. And now young people are asking the question, what's the point? What's the point of doing well in my exams? Because there's no jobs. What's the point in doing this? There might be another pandemic. What is the point in life? Because they're struggling to see any certainty. That's where I'm starting to see where young people are at.
Thanks, Joel. I mean, and I guess it begs the most obvious question is, in terms of cost of living, how do we communicate about this to our young people? You know, how do we develop that sense of empathy, but obviously at the same time realizing that the way we communicate is really important because it can be anxiety inducing if we're not careful ourselves. Does that make sense? So the way we communicate about these issues and how we communicate. Joel, why don't you kick us off as the young person here?
Sure. I think instinctively our reaction wants to be to protect our young people, to protect our kids, protect our young people we're seeing in youth work in schools. But we've got to come to the understanding that we can't shield them from this. Young people have phones. Everyone has phones. They know what's going on. They have phones. They can see what's going on. And young people are very observant. They can see when you're stressed. They can see when you're anxious. They know what's happening. So the first thing we need to do is take away this unrealistic expectation that we will be able to shield completely what is going on with our young people. They know what's going on. I think the first thing we need to do is have honest and open conversations with our young people. And what they look like is dependent on your relationship with that young person, their age, their maturity, what's going on. How you would speak to an 18-year-old about what is going on right now would be very different to how you speak to an 11-year-old. 18-year-old, you can have a bit more of a conversation, go, hey, here's what's happening, here's what's going on. An 11-year-old won't understand the concept of money as much as an 18-year-old. So how you communicate is very differently. But when you invite a young person into a conversation and go, hey, do you want to help be part of the solution? That allows a young person to have a bit more control of what's going on. And that's what reduces stress. So we need to start by inviting our young people into these conversations and helping them come up with the solutions for your context.
Great, thanks. And Natalie, you mentioned earlier about talking to your friends about poverty when you were younger and what it was like growing up, and the conversations you're hearing amongst young people. How do you feel that we should be communicating at a time like this?
Yeah, I think particularly at the moment, rather than, not so much because of my own experience growing up, but at the moment, the younger generation are more concerned about poverty and justice than I think I was when I was a teenager, or my peers were. There's that sense in which wanting your life to make a difference to the lives of others, concerning yourselves with the plight of others, is more important to teenagers right now than it was to me when I was a teenager and my peers around me. And so I think one of the ways we can communicate at this time is actually with language around empowerment and choice. Now, of course, if you're in a family where you don't know if you've got food on the table today, that might be a different conversation. But for those who are stressed and anxious but are themselves doing okay, even just about managing, I think there are conversations we can have around empowerment and around what it looks like to be people who, even with the very little we've got, can make a difference to those around us. Now, it might be, you've got clothes you can hand down to someone else who's struggling. It might be that you do have enough money where you can think, actually, have you got friends at school or college we can invite round to dinner? Not making a big thing about, we think you're in need, do you need help? But just actually very subtly. And so actually helping our young people to see where they can be part of the answer for other people, where they may have nothing they can offer except time. And will you go and have that conversation with that teenager that no one else is talking to? Will you be the one who reaches out and says to them, are you okay right now? Is there anything I can do for you? I think some of these conversations around just empowering young people to see that whatever situation they're in, even if they're in the most desperate of situations, they can also have a role in helping others around them at the same time. And I think that's language that is more faith-filled than fear-filled.
Yeah.
And I think obviously for those of us who are Christians, trying to make sure that we ourselves, where we're trying to talk to young people, are centered on the Bible rather than the newspaper headlines.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. It's so easy, isn't it? You know, you pick up your phone, you've got your BBC breaking news alerts, you're looking at your screen, you're thinking, life looks bleak, life looks rubbish. But actually, for those of us, who follow Jesus, there's a Bible that is full of words that are about finding faith, even in context of fear, finding certainty when absolutely nothing else around us is certain. And so I think just some of the language we're using and helping to build in faith, not unrealistically, not ignoring the situation around us, but trying to hold both in tension at the same time. That the headlines are real and genuine and bleak, but there is hope, there is faith, there is an opportunity to make a difference to the lives of others, even with whatever little we ourselves might have. And I think that language will empower, and also, for want of a better expression, taps into where young people are feeling like, I want to make a difference. I care about the issues around me, not just my own issues, and are perhaps less self-centered than certainly I was when I was a teenager and my peer group. So that's just a few thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Bejoy, I guess sort of following on for that, the dealing with helping young people deal with anxiety. I mean, I guess as street pastors, you must, and school pastors particularly, you're probably coming up against young people who are incredibly anxious about a whole host of things at the moment. How do we help our young people with anxiety, particularly around the cost of living?
Thank you. And I want to come off the back of what Natalie said, because I think she's absolutely right. The key is language, the language that we use to engage with our young people that empowers them. My experience of in youth work has been about 20 years with my local church and with the Ascension Trust. And the biggest thing I've learned over that time is young people thrive of responsibility. And so it's being that trusted voice that encourages young people to take part. And I think the key word in there is trust. The one way to help people deal with their issues of anxiety is to be that relational voice that's been that long-term impact, that's taken the time to listen to where young people are at. But I think alongside that, one of the challenges is we need to recognize that there may be certain contexts and cultures within our community where to talk about these things, to talk about them needing help, can bring shame, or there's an element of pride that we need to completely kind of disengage from and allow people to feel like actually we're creating an environment for things to be safe, but also for things to be messy, because it's only in the mess that we get the broad picture of actually the issue that we're dealing with. And then we can bring in those trusted voices to help deal and sit in the mess, because ultimately I think the key is not to really take people's mess away from them, but to empower people to recognize that we're building up the strength for them to pick themselves out of the mess, and we can be part of that support structure. But ultimately, the aim is to encourage that responsibility for them to feel empowered and to come away from that mess. And I suppose over this past year, I've been reflecting on what can that look like. And the word hope keeps coming to mind. And that hope is actually helping open people's eyes to the light that is there for them, that can grow the closer they get to it.
Yeah. So I think I agree with what's been said. I guess one of the things which I guess is the biggest question really, is how do we nurture that hope? Because I think if you're having done 26, 27 years of youth work and dealt with some people in some of the poorest communities in the country, it's really hard, and we often talk the language of hope, particularly in the church. But the reality is for someone living in some really tough situations, stressed out about their parents, often multiple debt, and I know, Cap, that you've done an amazing job, but in some of the poorest areas, there is so much stress. Ellie, it's what do we do to nurture hope? Surely that is almost like one of the biggest questions we can ask at the moment as the church.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the key role of us, as those of us who are Christians, is that we are able to, and as others have said, I think there's something about not burying our head in the sand as Christians, as the church, not sort of pretending there isn't a terrible big problem out there, but meeting it head on, knowing it, making ourselves aware, and then speaking to it and talking about it, and inviting other people to share and say, yeah, I'm struggling, and then be able to say, let me pray for you. Can I pray for you? And always be pointing to the light and the hope that there is in Jesus. That, as Christians, that's what we believe. One of my lines that I say many times is, as the darkness gets darker, as we haven't got hope to give you with your broken budget, we cannot get you out of hardship immediately. There are so many things that are holding you where you are, but God but Jesus Christ, who is the light of the world, can come in and bring some light into that darkness. And I think what that looks like practically is kindness, human kindness. It's listening, it's not judging, it's empathizing, all the things that seem really sort of standard, but where you haven't got the big answers, you kind of have to come down to, I think we just kind of come down to, can I give you a hug, and can I pray for you, and hey, do you want to come around for dinner? And that is actually how the light of the gospel is outworked. And in those moments of coming alongside people and being real, being honest, sometimes crying with people, sometimes telling them your own story, that's where the light sort of gets switched on, and then we can offer to pray for people and appeal to the King of Kings to bring some change in their circumstances, but also in the whole of the UK. So yeah, I think we can't underestimate the power of kindness and listening in everything.
And Joel, again, if you're a parent here or a teacher here, and you're sort of listening in on this conversation, thinking, what does that look like in terms of more practical suggestions? Because I guess, again, what we want people to go away is going, actually, there is hope. There is things that we can do. For you, from your perspective, how do you nurture hope?
nurture and hope all comes from the environment. I've seen a lot of young people, for me, when I'm talking to young people, the environment needs to be safe for hope to be found. You need to allow young people to feel accepted and loved. And most times young people feel accepted and loved in a safe space. I've realized before I can speak into young people's lives, I need to level with them and allow them to know that they are loved and that they are accepted. Allow them to know those two things. And when you realize, this is for anyone, when you realize those two things, there's a humongous safety in that relationship, isn't there? When you realize you are loved and accepted in that relationship, you feel safe. And in that place, you nurture hope. In that place, you have those conversations. In that place, you go, hey, what's going on? Where are the stresses? How can we help with that? What's the hope here? For me, in this time, with all the stresses, it's nurture and hope is allowing young people to work out how they look after their stress. So one of the massive things I'm using a lot at the moment, what we use in our material, is the activity called the stress bucket. If you don't know about it, search online, it's super helpful. But going through that with young people and going, hey, what things are stressing you out right now? And what things are helping you reduce those stress levels? And how can I, as a youth worker, or for people as a parent or a school teacher, how can I help you reduce those stress levels? Finding hope by equipping them to look after what's going on is where I'm seeing how we nurture hope at the moment.
Okay, interesting. We've got some questions here around how do I feel guilty about buying children less presents this Christmas, I guess, as budgets start to get squeezed, people start feeling that guilty that they can't offer as much maybe as they used to. Natalie, what would you say to that?
I mean, I think it obviously just depends on individual situations, doesn't it? But I've got a friend who this year has already bought her child more presents than usual, but each present is something much, much smaller than usual. So she actually went down the route of, I don't know the exact number, but saying something to him like, you can have 25 presents of this sort of size. What do you want? And so him having choice and agency in it again, which I think is about the empowerment thing. So I think there are options like that where you can actually have a lot of presents, but at a lower cost. I think it is also having honest conversations around finances. I mean, I think that's something we tend to shy away from, isn't it? I mean, even as adults, we can be scared of talking about money, but, helping by talking to young people about the realities of money and about choices. I think actually one of the key things is offering choice where we can. And, I actually bought my mum for Christmas one year a loaf of bread. And when I was a student, my mum used to buy me shower gel, shampoo, conditioner. Those were Christmas presents. And you have those conversations and you talk around, actually, what is it that you need? What do we not want to go without? And therefore we'll make it into a Christmas present. And of course, it's not as exciting unwrapping a bottle of shampoo as it is, I don't know, unwrapping something more exciting. But actually, at the end of the day, I think the key thing is talking. The key thing is having that dialogue. The key thing is, again, I think like several people have said, not trying to hide and bury our heads in the sand and say this isn't happening, but to have that honest conversation. Also, I think that how you bring hope into that is by not making it necessarily a long-term thing. So having a conversation about, at this moment in time, things are a bit tight financially. This Christmas, we're going to have to do things a bit differently, and making it that's this year. Next year, we might be able to do something bigger, and not promising and not guaranteeing it, but having conversations around the temporary nature of things, I think can be quite helpful in just making sure we're not setting out this is now the situation forevermore, but this is where we're at right now, and bringing our young people into that conversation. What do you think we should do differently? I mean, obviously young people often have a lot more creative ideas than adults, and I think there's lots of opportunities to suggest ideas for how to do things differently, which I think is really just important we involve our young people in those conversations.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I think, Bejoy, I was thinking through this, how do we inspire our young people, I guess, to be part of the change? I think Natalie rightly says that this generation are actually passionate about justice. They're passionate about health. They're passionate about their peers. And wherever they are, it's like it's not doing things to them. You know, we often used to in XLP talk about the difference between doing things to people with the best intentions in the world, doing things for people, which I think sometimes the church can fall into a little bit, and there's a role sometimes to play in that, but it can be quite patronising as well. How do we do things with people? How do we create that sense of being alongside and then being able to inspire change for young people and involving them in the solutions, because they're incredibly creative.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think part of it is us as leaders to be humble enough to give up our platforms and allow young people the space to take up that mantle so that their voices can be elevated and their voices can be heard. I've been blessed within my church that people have done that for me. People have given me the space to shine, which has allowed me to get to where I am today. But I think one of the things, again, another reflection I've been having is the nature of language. When we talk about what love looks like and what value looks like in the church, we often spell it LOVE. But the moment we step out the doors, it's spelled differently. And love and value is spelled TIME. Where are we actually investing that time in people to recognize that actually what I've got to say is worth something, which then empowers them to say, actually, I have something to say, and now I need the audience to say it. At which point we say, okay, let's give you that audience. It's about, yeah, I think just there's a certain amount of humility that needs to come from us to recognize that where are we allowing the voices that need to be heard be heard.
Brilliant. For you, Ellie, we've got a really interesting question here. How can we support our young people about empowering them about their own budgeting, giving them a skill set around their own financial understanding?
Well, my top tip is to start early. Start really young. We used to regularly play Monopoly, and I would throw into the Monopoly game the understanding of the principle of see you've got no money left, or see you've got enough money now, so that children are beginning to understand the concept of money, that it isn't just, and then when you've played Monopoly, you can say when you go shopping around the supermarket, you can talk about, see, this was my budget and I'm kind of working to this amount, I'm up to this number. So it becomes something that gets talked about, that budgeting is a thing that you do, money is a thing that you talk about, and to talk about constraints as early as possible as well. I always think that sometimes children can grow up with the culture we have of that, you know, money is no object and you can have anything you want, and you just keep asking mum and dad, and it's mum and dad's fault if you don't get it. But to talk from an early age about the concept of constraints and budgets, and the fact that money is finite for anybody, there's a budget. And that's what we're working to. Thinking of Christmas, we've often said there's a budget, guys, and that's what we're working to. And so there won't be any more or less than that being spent. We've always tried to be, because we've had our own money troubles, we've always tried to be quite open with our kids and about where we're up to. Even like, well, we've £30 left for the rest of the week, guys, so we're going to have beans on toast twice, but you can have extra toast. And, you know, so that you are working into your language and understanding with the children and young people that money, constraint, managing your resources carefully, and sometimes it's tight and you have to eke by, and of course for some people you can't even eke by. So talking about it and doing some budget work. So CAP run our CAP Money course. We have a youth version, and it kind of basically talks about, if you want to go to the cinema and pay for your football subs, you can't do both. The exercise is to work through, you've a limited amount of money, what do you not do? To try and again get that principle of sort of constraint and finite resources, to help children and young people know that it isn't just a sort of an endless, money is never an endless bucket where you can have what you want, but you need to make choices. Of course, that doesn't really speak to the crisis that many families are in, where your choices are extremely limited. And in those circumstances, it's looking for the things that don't cost money for a family, going for walks, playing games, watching films, going and seeing friends. It doesn't cost money, but it's good for your well-being, it's good for your family. So those would be my thoughts.
I guess, Bejoy, I don't know if you've come across this, but I sort of feel like there's a street economy that goes on as well, and that when young people are really struggling with money, there are other ways to get money. So I remember in a school assembly once, a kid put his hand up and said, "Why would I bother working all these hours? I can get 20 grand in a night." And what do you say to that, Mr. Regan? And it's very real, isn't it, in terms of crime, in terms of some of the ways that these young people. What would you say? What would you say to a young person who's actually going, blow it, I ain't going this way because I can make a lot more money this way and I can provide. And I think there is a guy, like being the whole man of the house thing. I've seen a lot of guys going, if there isn't a dad there, sometimes there's temporary dads there, and sometimes it could be the other way around. Mum's not around and dad's there. You feel like you need to take on that parental responsibility, particularly if you've got younger brothers and sisters. I know it's a really complex thing, but it's reality for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. The reality is, in moments of extreme vulnerability, there is always people who want to exploit that and use it for their own ill will. And I think we as the church, we as Christians need to recognize that there's a space that we need to invade, because we need to look out for those vulnerable people ourselves. We need to know where they are. We need to be that visible presence that recognizes that actually, if we can be the voice of love, that voice of encouragement, that voice of support, to highlight some of the challenges, because the reality is actually, it's not necessarily the immediate need that people are desiring. People are desiring to be valued. People are desiring to be recognized. People are desiring that attention. So where are we allowing ourselves to be that attention? Where are we allowing ourselves to be that family? Where are we allowing ourselves to be that voice that speaks into those situations? And from there, help at looking at the nature of building up healthy, responsible young people, because ultimately it's a responsibility that young people thrive. And I think there's a challenge here, because unfortunately, if we look at the extremes of the criminal nature that some of these young people fall into, it's because they're promised the things of security, of belonging, and of fame and of wealth, which in a nutshell are things of the gospel. Because Jesus promises security, Jesus promises belonging, Jesus promises life in all its fullness, but he's doing it for the benefit of the individual, whereas other people are doing it for the benefit of themselves. And so it's that balance of, where are we allowing the truth to be truth and not just the lie that sounds like truth? And where are we being that visible presence to bring that truth that Jesus says and is and does into our communities, into the lives of our young people, to show them that there is another way, and there is a way that brings them into health in all aspects of that.
Yeah. So I guess in some ways you're talking a bit about proximity, aren't you? Is that actually messages are heard so much better through relationship.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like relationship nurtures the belief that change is possible, but building relationship is a long haul, takes time. And Natalie, in terms of relationship building, churches, parents, schools, building those relationships with their community, what have you seen really work? What are those things that you go, oh my goodness, that's made a tangible difference in those people's lives, which people can maybe go, oh, I could take that way and apply it to my community as well?
I think for me, it's where particularly people have just moved beyond projects into real, genuine friendship that's two-way, being prepared to be vulnerable, being prepared to have the humility to say, actually, I'm sure I can learn as much from you as you can from me, even though outwardly people might say, I've got my life together more than you have. If people are, we judge like that, don't we? And
yeah.
So I think there's the humility, there's the vulnerability, and the word you use, proximity. It's sometimes we can get close to people, but still hold them at arm's length. We can feel like we're doing our duty, even doing a shift at a food bank, for example, which I love food bank. We've got one here in my church that I'm involved in, but it can enable us to hold people at arm's length, and people know the difference. We all know the difference between being given food from a charity and being invited to someone's house for dinner. And so there's something around that relationship that goes beyond how can I help you, but is actually meaningful and isn't just one way, but is two-way. And I think the other thing is that we are in such a quick fix society. You know, we want everything quickly. We've got quick access to everything. I don't know about you. You know, if I can't get a Wi-Fi connection for 30 seconds, I get impatient because I feel like it should be on tap the minute I go to my phone. And in that context, we're not used to being involved for the long haul. We're not used to change being slow. And so the analogy I often use is talking about what the Bible talks about is oaks of righteousness in Isaiah 61. But the fastest growing oak trees take 20 years to mature, and most oak trees take 50 to 100 years. And the growth is imperceptible for most of the time. You know, it's kind of like the 1 minute they're a little shoot, the next minute they're a massive tree, but somehow in the middle we don't see the growth. And so I think we need to ourselves and help others to just cultivate actually a bit more patience in our own lives, patience with ourselves often actually in our own rate of growth. But we've got to invest in people for the long term. We can't think, well, I've spent 6 months with you and you haven't changed. Yeah. Well, most of us don't really change in individual 6-month periods. You know, we change over years and years, and we suddenly notice there's a massive difference between who I am today and who I was 10 years ago. So I think that thing of investing for the long haul, but getting up real close, like properly, you know, you're my friend. And so that actually means that when I need something, I'm going to call you. It's not just that I'm going to get in this kind of savior complex mentality where it's all about what I can do to lift you out of your circumstances. It's as much about where can you help me? What can I learn from you? And where can I see the image of God reflected through you in ways that he's not reflected through me? So it's a few small thoughts.
No, that's really helpful. I know for me, one of the books I found really helpful is a book called Toxic Charity. It's how churches and charities hurt those they're trying to serve and how to reverse it. And I think this is really important that charity is based on long-term relationship building, because it has the potential to do more harm than good. You know, I've seen dads, like when presents are given out to families, disappear out the back door because they just feel so humiliated because they couldn't provide for their kids. And so I do think it's how we do some of this stuff, which is more sort of thinking about the local context. I mean, an obvious illustration that was used, that when Haiti had their earthquake, you know, with all the best intentions in the world over here, we needed to put Haiti's clothing business out of business because we sent so many clothes over there that actually the local clothing business nearly shut down. And so again, I think it's really important for people listening is that to understand our local context, to understand what's going on in our communities. And you only understand by humility and asking questions and being alongside, which is very different to saying we've got all the answers and we're trying to fix you. And so I think our posture is really, really important in terms of looking at this sort of stuff. Joel, there's just one last question to you, really. There's a few questions around, my child is oblivious to what's going on in terms of cost of living. How do I communicate to them? I don't want them to feel worried or guilty, but at the same time, I want them to realise that this is a challenge for, maybe not be a challenge for our family, but it's a challenge for a huge amount of people out there.
Sure. I think first off, with your child being oblivious about what's going on, that they might be oblivious, that's very fair, or they might be hiding it. So I think the first thing is to work out what your child is feeling and what's going on. And that's not by asking questions about the cost of living or anything, but just going, hey, what are your worries at the moment? What's stressful in your life right now? And what I found when I was a young person is I wouldn't answer those questions ever unless I was doing something alongside doing it. If someone sat me down and was like, what are you stressful about? Like, nothing, I want to go. But if we're going for a walk, or if we're kicking the ball around, or if we're doing something and we're side by side, and someone goes, hey, what's stressful about life right now? That's when I'd start to share. That's when I'd start to have a conversation. So I think first thing is working out, do they know what's going on? What's the conversation? And secondly, like we've said earlier, getting into the mess. For me, one of the most impactful things in my teenage years was something about the ages of 11 to 14. Every Sunday I spent with a bunch of homeless people, making them beans on toast and bacon. And these guys are all from all over Ipswich. None of them really had a set address, and all of them are all in all kinds of things, and just getting to know them, getting to know their experiences, and seeing mess from a very close proximity. Like I remember one time going to see someone who just come out of rehab with my dad, and he was in a bad way. And that for me was impactful because I saw what was going on. This wasn't, like we've said before, a stat about what something happening. This was being in the mess and being part of the change. So if your child is oblivious, if you're not sure what they know, figure out what they know, but actually get in the mess with them. Help them see it. Let's go, hey, how are we going to fix this together?
Yeah. Fantastic. And again, a lot of really helpful things in the chat, people putting in. I know Ellie and Natalie mentioned car journeys are very helpful. I think that's where I see my teenage daughter the most, and probably where she talks to me the most as well. And so working out those spaces where we can communicate and we can have those conversations, so it's really, really helpful. Guys, is there anything else anyone's burning to say just as we start to wrap up? We'll let Joel wrap up in a minute, but Ellie, anything else you've got on your heart you wanted to say?
I think my main thing was just about being really open and honest with the young people that you're with, whether it's in family or in church, is just, yeah, being curious and observant of where they're at, and also don't avoid talking about the news. Talk about it, but make sure you talk about it in a healthy way, with all the hope and things that we've talked about, so that there isn't this big gap for anxiety to sit in. Let's kill the gap so that anxiety can get busted out because we've talked about it and it'll all be okay, kind of thing. That would be my top reflection.
Great, thank you. Bejoy, anything from you?
Yeah, no, I think the key thing is let's also just keep focus on the little things that we can do, the little differences that we can make on a daily basis within our community, with our neighbours, with our family, because they make a big impact that we may not see. But let's not forget the little things. God is there in the details as well as the big picture.
Fantastic. And Natalie, anything that you want to finish with?
Yeah, I just think, just to echo everything that's already been said, but I think also for, those who are parents or carers or guardians or teachers or youth workers, just, to remember to keep having those conversations, but involving young people in any choices, any decision-making part of the process. I think also just finally, I'd say it's a bit like the thing on a plane of put on your own oxygen mask first. So if you're anxious, attend to that anxiety, take whatever help you can get with that. Be looking at Jesus as much as that's possible, but, be having counselling, be getting medical support, whatever it is that you need, so that you are accessing that help and therefore will be in a stronger position to help others at the same time.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Ellie and Bejoy and Natalie. We're going to give the last word to the youngest person here. So Joel, why don't you share your little heart around safe places? That would be amazing. I don't know why I said little heart. You've got a big heart.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate me and my little heart appreciate that. For me, what I keep coming back to and what I think is utterly staggering is that there is over 1.5 million children and young people who need mental health support right now in the UK. Over 1.5 million young people who need that support. And only a fifth of those young people get the support they need. So we're seeing now a massive load of young people not getting the mental health support they need. And already our services are stretched. Already our services are full. And as the cost of living gets worse, as we go further into winter, as it gets more tight, that number of young people who are going to be struggling with their mental health is going to get more and more. We're at this place right now where there's loads of young people being missed off for help because there's no help there. And actually, as youth workers, as teachers, as parents, as church leaders, as charity organisations, we have a duty to the next generation to support them in their mental health. We have a duty to create safe spaces so our young people can learn to be equipped to look after their own emotional health and the emotional health of their friends. Because if not, we're going to get further and further into this pit where loads of people are struggling and nobody knows what to do. So I really want to encourage you guys today is to go, how can we equip our young people to look after our mental health? And as Kintsugi Hope, we don't want to be someone who's saying, let's do this and not provide any tools to do it. We want to be part of the change. We want to point out what's going on, but actually go, hey, we want to help you. We want to equip you so you can equip your young people. And that's why we created Kintsugi Hope Youth Wellbeing Groups. Kintsugi Hope Youth Wellbeing Groups are a 6-week-long wellbeing group program, what you run in your local school, in your local youth group, with your friends at the library. And the whole idea is to gather young people for 6 weeks, to engage them in conversations around mental and emotional health, to love them, to serve them, and to equip them to look after their mental and emotional health. What these groups do is create safe spaces. They allow a place where hope can be nurtured. And we wrote this through 7 different learning styles. So there's loads of different ways you can do this. It's very much, you contextualize it to wherever you are and whatever your setting is. And over the past 2 years of releasing this, we've seen over 1,000 young people go through the wellbeing groups. We've seen over 110 wellbeing groups run, and 2/3 of them have been in schools. And for me, those stats are amazing, but what gets me excited is the stories of a young person coming into a wellbeing group, really showing anxiety and never really speaking. And then on the week of anxiety, doing an activity, and the youth worker going, who wants to share? And her going, I'll share. And she starts telling about her life and then goes, right, who's next? And starts helping other young people. And then they said after the 6 weeks, she was hardly recognisable because she found a safe space where she was accepted and learned to look after her own well-being. Another story of what I got told recently of a wellbeing group happening, and the youth leader felt that he just wanted to say, hey, do you guys know how much you are loved? And one young person just completely broke down. So for them, in this uncertainty, what they needed to be reminded of was the fact that they are so loved. Our young people need to be reminded about that. Another story of a young person coming really upset because they go, wait, it's okay, I feel sad. I felt so guilty for feeling sad because my life is good and my friend's life isn't good. And for her, that was a release of the shackles of shame, what allowed her to go and get the help she needed and further support. These wellbeing groups are really helping our young people. There's a student wellbeing group that ran where a young person came to it who was suicidal. And in the wellbeing group, he found a friend. And actually, you know, when you find a friend, life's just that little bit easier. For him, he was able to get the help he needed. We're seeing these groups actually save young people's lives. One head teacher said this, there's so much demand that we could run a new group every week and we could just picking up groups. Much of the content is also equipping us in better understanding our staff and students too. Guys, our young people are struggling. Our young people need our help. We can't just stand on the sidelines and watch this next generation struggle with mental health. So please, please think about what you can do. If it's running a Kintsugi wellbeing group, that's amazing, but there's so many other things you can do as well. Please engage in this conversation and equip your young people to look after themselves so there is a better future, what they can be hopeful for. If you want to speak to me more about that, then here's my email. If you want to know more about Kintsugi Youth, there is a website there. But that's enough for me, Patrick.